All right, hello everyone and welcome. It is Tuesday, February 16th, and we are just past halfway through the month. We have hit the beginning of week 3, and we have a new round of assignments to discover. You have submitted the most current round of submissions and assignments for review, and we are going to take some time here at the end of class and listen to a couple of submissions from Angry Bots. We got that. Oops. We got that. Whoa. You're jumping all over the place, Logic. Um, so we're going to review some of the submissions from last week and talk about the grade sheets and getting prepared for revisions for those assignments in this week. And then, of course, we have the new week 3 assignments. So everything is going at full pace through this week, and week 4 does lighten up a bit because there's no brand new game and whole game project. You will still be working on the revisions for the week 3 assignments, but there is no game in the 4th week because we don't have a week 5 to revise those assignments. So there is a composition in the last week, but it applies to kind of the overall theme going into the 4th week is, wrapping up some of the technology topics that we will get into starting in on week 3. But week 4 rounds out with a discussion of how do you take all of the ideas and materials that you've learned and apply it outside of class. So we get into a bit of the industry and how to present yourself in a professional manner, and working on your demo reel and portfolio, and getting together all of the materials that you can to show off future clients and employers. So the last week does have a new composition kind of related to that, but no brand new game project to work with. So week 3 here, you have the revisions from the previous week and the new assignments to work on. Hopefully you've taken the time to download your week 3 game composition, the production technique, and the technical assignment. And we will be talking about each one of those. And let's see, what else do we need to discuss? You pretty much are on, have everything under control from the previous week. And we have the brand new assignments here, but basically once you get the kind of flow down of how the assignments and the revision schedule works, kind of rolls like that throughout the month. So we've got a nice detailed new game project here to work with. So let's dive into our game composition, which is called Palace of Renthalion. And of course, like all of our games throughout the month, each one of them has the final result of you will be delivering a series of WAV files that make up the game soundtrack. And those WAV files are in each game through the weeks have used the WAV files in a different way, in a different musical approach to that's appropriate for the gameplay of that current project. So all of our games this month have taken the approach of one file playing at a time, one piece of music playing at a time. You have the intros, the main loops, and the endings, but really as the new one turns on and starts playing, the previous one ends. In ambient and action, most of the gameplay is alternating back and forth between the ambient and action cues, and how do we properly switch back and forth that makes sense musically. But again, only one of them are playing at a time, or at the most you get a crossfade back and forth between the two pieces of music. However, this game has a unique challenge where the player can turn on and off multiple pieces of music simultaneously, and so multiple wave files have the chance of playing together at the same time. How do we introduce a new piece of music at any random point when some other piece of music or multiple pieces of music are already playing? And so we are talking, or the musical approach is how do we keep everything in sync? How do we introduce and add new layers and remove layers at different times according to the gameplay? Palace of Orinthalion. Let's see. Well, it is a game. It's a free game project that's available on the Unity Asset Store. And really, it's not a game so much as a very nice, really cool-looking environment for our music, a place to showcase our music. So let me load it up here, just to get this part happening. Let's see. Let's do a low resolution here because I have a small window set up. We see here it's made by GearTech Games, and it's a free available asset on the Unity Game Asset Store. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we talk about the technology that is running all of these games in the background. And I'll explain the overall idea of the game and the musical direction of the story. But what I really want to introduce to start out is this is just a palace or an environment. There is no game going on here. There's no characters. There's no story. There's no real objectives to it. But it does give us an environment or a kind of a game world to be able to showcase how the music is going to play. And this is very indicative of the type of project, the version of a game that you might get pretty early on in the process, where they say, hey, we have the art department sent us this really cool looking Viking palace that's going to be part of one part of the game world. Here it is, check it out. We're going to need some music for it. There's no story, there's no characters, the game hasn't been fleshed out in this area, but you have the ability to kind of wander around and see what it all looks like. And it really, I mean, if you keep wandering off into some random direction, you'll either fall off the end or you'll hit an invisible wall where you can't go any farther. But the player does have the ability to interact with your music. So the way this works, the final result or the final assets that you will deliver is a series of 4 wave files. And those wave files are related to one of these 4 doorways. We have, and they each have a title across that is one of the 4 ancient elements. We've got earth, wind, fire, and water. And what this represents in the game is the game is mimicking an open world fantasy type of game. We talked about different game genres and the idea of an open world where the player can wander off in lots of different directions and approach a story in many different ways. Some games are very, very linear, where they are based off of levels and you progress through at a certain pace and you always know that you're going from point A to B to C. But an open world game, you are presented with lots of different options. Often you are placed somewhere that's safe, and you talk to, like in a town somewhere, and you're talking to all of the villagers, and you're getting stories and quests and adventures. And the player can go off in multiple different directions and attack any of those storylines in any way that they want. So for this game, we have 4 different paths that the player can walk out. So it assumes that you would walk out this doorway and kind of go in this direction for this part of the adventure. And so they represent 4 different parts of the game, and they are going to have 4 different pieces of music. There are going to be 4 wave files that represent each one of these 4 directions. So we will talk about how the music actually works in the game, how it all plays together, and then we will talk about the actual musical design of the game, the sort of direction that you want to head with the instrumentation, the genre, and the overall approach to it. I guess before I start, I really should throw out there that with this game, the soundtrack requires an acoustic, an orchestral sound palette, right? No synthesizers, no drum machines, no real heavy effects processing. You're mainly focused on the instruments of the orchestra, and obviously you are using sample libraries, and at least by default, the Contact sample library, Contact factory orchestral library is going to be your best source of orchestral sounds, unless you have your own strings or brass or winds library. Those are a good place to start. So, how the music actually works in this game. When the player walks out any one of these doorways, there's a text prompt that pops up that says press E to engage. And when the player does this, they will hear a piece of music start playing. Now I want to check my levels to make sure this doesn't blast anybody while this happens. Let's see. Let me just check everything here. All right, I need to switch that. And I'm going to turn down the level here a little bit. And that will probably also turn down my microphone. But I will turn on and off the music here for just a sec. All right. So I walk out here and I press E. All right, are you able to hear the music? Hopefully it doesn't cut my microphone too much. Let's see here. Turn this up a little bit. All right, looks like it's working. All right. If I press E again, it turns off the music. You can also visualize this with the torch. Turns that on and off. All right, so that's the basic interaction that the player has with the music, is they can turn it on and off. And one thing to notice is that the music is at a different place every single time you turn it off. It's not starting over again at the beginning each time. So what you're really effectively doing is muting the music on and off. If I go off to another doorway, I can turn on another piece of music. And then the challenge here is I can walk out any one of these doorways and turn on that piece of music at any random point in time. When I walk away, it continues to play. And then I have the ability to turn on another piece of music. And the challenge is, how do we introduce this piece of music so that it stays in sync and in time with everything else? Water cue. when the music fades in and out, it fades over 3 seconds. And so the initial challenge is that the player can turn on and off all of these pieces of music at the same time. They need to stay in sync when they're playing together, and they cannot clash. They cannot clash because they're out of key, or any incorrect notes, or bad rhythms. You don't want any clashing notes or clashing rhythms. So the way that this is accomplished, let me get my demo session here. Let's see, where did Finder go? Week 3, demo. Here we go. Here's the same piece of music. Let me make sure this is set up correctly. That should do it. All right, so the way that this is going to work is you are going to create 4 wave files. Those wave files are going to need to be able to play at the same time. So they're going to need to be in the same key, at the same tempo. They're going to need to start at the same time. They're going to need to end at the same time. And they're going to need to loop all together to be able to stay in sync. And the way that this works in the game is that these pieces of music are what's known as vertically layered, meaning that they are layered on top of each other. They're playing together at the same time. And when you start the game, the loop starts, the piece of music, all 4 wave files start playing at the same time, and all of their volumes are down at 0 inside of the game. Now the game has control over the volume and the playback of all of the sounds. And when you walk out of the earth doorway here, and you press the E key, it starts fading, and fading in the earth cue over 3 seconds. And it fades it up to unity. And if the player were to hit the button again, the torches would turn off and it would fade back out to negative infinity or silence. So when the player comes and turns on and off a piece of music, what they are doing is just fading the files up and down. The music is constantly playing. It starts at the beginning and it ends at the same time, so that they are all in looping and syncing, they are all looping and in sync at all times. So this allows you to introduce any piece of music whenever you want. All right, so that is how the music is working. You have to make sure that all of these files are exactly the same length. If you did something like this, I'll just go over here. Every once in a while I get files that are delivered like this. Right? They're all different lengths. And the game will not loop those correctly because they'll either do this, where they start looping them, but they all get farther and farther off out of time. So you want to make sure that they are all going to be the same exact length so that they loop together. If they are different lengths, let's do this. Gotta make more room here. The other way that the game can actually screw this up is this is how our game works, where it starts all at the beginning and it plays in sync, and then one by one the files will stop, and it just waits for the longest piece of music, and then loops around and starts over again, and then the first one stops, and the second one stops, third one stops, and then it loops around again. So that's going to throw everything off also. All the files have to be exactly the same length, in the same tempo and the same time signature, so that they rhythmically mesh together and work well together, and in the same key, following a similar chord progression, so that they all make sense and sonically work together. So let's talk about the music of each one of these and what it represents. So if your composition, all of your files have to be the same length, have to start at the same time, end at the same time, following in the same key, in the same tempo, in the same time signature, and following a similar chord progression, then how do you actually make them sound different? Where does the individual feel or sound of each one of these cues come from? And it really comes from two parts. One is the instrumentation, your choice of instruments that is playing the overall progression and melodic idea from these cues. That is going to define most of the voice, how it sounds. And then your choice of melody, the individual melodies that will be contained for each one of these cues is going to give its most distinct kind of idea. So let's talk about instrumentation. We said that everything, no synths, no drum machines, everything needs to be either in the acoustic space or certainly the orchestral space. So the earth cue, we just said that each one of these represents a different part of the story, a different part of the story that you will encounter as you play through the game. So the earth cue represents the hero and the hero's journey. It is typically something that we heard in the beginning of the game, where the hero is all it's all positive and it's got a strong adventurous kind of theme to it. There's a heroic element. Your player is confident and they're setting out on their adventure. I picture this cue maybe being a group of the local town bards or entertainers or musicians, and they're singing the praises of the local adventurer. And so the instrumentation would probably be smaller handheld instruments, something that a group of musicians could play, and that could be winds would work, a flute or a piccolo, maybe an oboe or a clarinet, and from the strings, a fiddle would work. Maybe a lute or a guitar or a harp has a plucked string. You want to avoid ensembles. You're not bringing out the full string section or the brass section at this point, so you want to go for more solo instrumentation. There would also probably be something in a lower, in the percussion, in the lower range, so maybe some hand percussion, something that's keeping a bit of the rhythm, establishing some of the pace for this cue. So again, 4 or 5 musicians playing this part with different solo instrumentation. The wind cue is going to represent the enemy or the danger that is out there, but the player has not actually encountered. This is not the action. This is not the direct battle with the enemy. This is the player has maybe seen the enemies out there and they're trying to creep around, or there are enemies around and the music is there to kind of warn you. Or it could also have maybe a stealth element to it, where you're trying to creep around and avoid the danger. So it represents tension and the kind of foreboding, a bit of the danger that is coming up, and the player trying to get around and maybe avoid that action directly. So this works very well and heavier in the lower registers. Cellos and bass, low brass could work here. Maybe big drums or timpanis providing a pulse. Also, something, maybe a little bit of tension from some winds in the higher registers, or some tremolo strings used very sparsely. But it's almost a bit of unease and unsettling kind of feel. The fire cue is the actual action or the battle itself. So the player cannot entirely avoid all danger through the game. A large portion of what the game play might be is actual fighting and battling with the enemy. So the fire is going to be your biggest and loudest and strongest cue. It's going to have the most instrumentation, the most power, the most level or volume. So you're going to break out the full orchestra for this one, full brass sections, maybe some ostinato string parts, strong, low French horns and cellos, and big percussion, rolling or marching snares, timpanis, cymbal, big crash cymbals. I just want to pull out. This one's going to be everything, everything rhythmic and percussive. So pull out all the instrumentation and focus on the power of this particular cue. And then the water cue represents the emotional ups and downs or twists and turns in the storyline of the game. And this really can go in one of two ways. You can choose one of two musical directions here. It can either be everything that is in the positive and right and winning and uplifting direction. So you can go in one way and choose that it represents love, and maybe you saved the town, and you defeated the monster, and you saved the kingdom, or you found the treasure, or you solved the puzzle, or you're just overall winning and powerful, and everything is right in the world. Or you can go in the negative direction, where it can represent longing or loss, or death or suffering or pain, or losing, or just everything in the negative direction overall. Really, the main focus on this cue is you're pulling at the emotional heartstrings of the player in one direction or the other. And I leave that up to you. So this really classical sort of romantic emotional string lines could work. Wind lines, a bit, what else? Pianos, harpsichords, or harps work very well for this kind of theme. So determine what instrumentation you would like to use, and kind of define the overall voice of what that particular cue might sound like. So let's listen. I got we kind of already started with one example, and I have it here again in the Logic session. Let's see here. All right, so we heard that the earth cue is a bit more light and airy and staccato and upbeat and positive. Here's the wind cue. Right, so much lower and slow and kind of evil approaching kind of feel. There's a little bit of layers in the top higher ranges. There's a bit of a low percussion every once in a while. Here's the fire cue. So you hear the bigger percussion, the brass hits, some of the string lines. There's the water cue. Choirs through this one. Some harp every once in a while. So the challenge here again is you got to make sure that all four of these can play. All four of the cues can play at the same time. If we bring all of these up to unity, nothing should really clash, nothing should really stick out. Or get completely buried in the mix. Now it can end up sounding a little bit dense and cluttered, and you have to consider how one piece of music or instrumentation weighs against another. Let's try another one here. All the game is going to do is bring the faders up and down to unity. So you want to make sure that the mix, when you bounce the files, the bounced version is the exact mix that you want when all four faders are unity. Like, that is the mix that you want to be heard, and bounce the files that way, because that's all the game is going to do, is just bring the files up and down to unity. Here in the chat, Jermaine, are they all the same tempo with different rhythms? Exactly. They're going to need to follow the same tempo. You can work with half time and double time, but they all need to fall kind of lockstep into each other so that they do not clash rhythmically. Earth. All right, let's start with this one. Carmen here in the chat, can we use a little sound design? I would avoid like sound effect sounds, and really probably not. What kind of sounds are you thinking? Because sound design would be a separate element, and you do not want to bounce sound effects into your music. Because it gets a little confusing between the music composer and the sound designer when the game's all put together to mix. So I would have typically avoid adding things like ambiences or footsteps or any other elements that are not strictly musical. Let's listen to the Earth cue here. I like this one because it certainly has a strong lead melodic line from the brass. Very heroic and adventurous. There's the wind cue. Now this one actually has some of the interesting like cymbal effects, and got to watch out for those because they get a bit used often. But it does have a little bit of a pulse to it. But it does kind of extend out and provide a bit of suspense. fire cue. Strong percussion, strong brass. Kind of a Viking choir back there. Here's the water cue. You got the lead string line, string section, the harp. And everything has to make sense together when it plays at the same time. Alright, so that is how the music is going to be set up. It's how it's going to work through the game. Here in the chat, different instrument patches for each cue. Yes, you should have different categories, different combinations of instruments for the different cues. You can there's a couple of different things to watch out for here. You can reuse instrumentation in multiple cues. Just because you used a sustained violin doesn't mean that you can't use a sustained violin somewhere else. But do not copy the exact same performance between those violins. So you can't have the same exact performance repeated in multiple cues. And you don't want to have too much shared instrumentation, but something as generic as a violin or viola or cello might be appropriate in multiple cues. Sometimes what I'll get is repeated instrumentation bounced in multiple cues, like the same snare line repeated 4 times in all 4 cues. Or sometimes I'll get the earth cue is the instruments on its own, as it should be, but then the wind cue is the earth and wind, and the fire cue is the earth and wind and fire, and the water cue is all 4, earth, wind, fire, and water, where they're basically building everything up in the actual wave files. The game is going to be mixing everything. It's going to be combining everything for you, so you don't want to repeat any instrumentation, and especially repeat any exact performance between multiple cues, right? So it just kind of watch out for how it's actually used in multiple places. What else? Everything has to be set up so that it all makes sense when it works together. The real challenge here is it ends up being like a puzzle pieces where all 4 of these have to work together and in multiple different ways and combinations. So you can have a problem of basically musically painting yourself into a corner where you are let me load up a session here. You have created tracks one at a time and are building them up, and with each new instrument you have reduced the number of options in a particular key or in the number of subdivisions that you can divide the beat. So there's only so many notes in the key and only so many rhythmic variations to work from. So you want to make sure that every note that you introduce and every instrument and rhythm makes sense with all of the other previous layers. And when building that up instrument by instrument, that becomes quite a difficult approach. So I would avoid that sort of bottom up or building up of your tracks one by one, which is actually a really common way that most people make music, including myself. And when building larger compositions like this, there are other ways of thinking about this that may make a little bit more sense overall. Got another session here. Another example. So most of the time when people make music, this is the way they do it. They're like, okay, I'm going to write a piece of music here, and so I'm either going to start with the melody, or I'm going to start with the chord progression, or I'm going to start with the drums. Maybe they'll say, okay, here's a kick, snare, and hi-hat pattern, and they'll knock that part out, and they'll write 16 bars of a drum pattern. And then they will, excuse me for a sec. They'll say, okay, here's my drums. Now I'm going to add the bass. They'll write the bass line. Then, okay, now I'm going to load up an electric piano and write out my chord progression. Then I'm going to add a guitar part, and then I'm going to add this horn line, and basically layer by layer they are building up more and more tracks when creating the beat or the particular composition. So when you have a session that is going to end out with multiple different tracks working together, it becomes a bit more difficult to be able to make a composition that all of the parts need to fit together in multiple different ways or combinations, because you can start running out of options and ideas if you start throwing the same note in there over and over again, or you don't kind of plan the overall composition in a manner to kind of start with. So what I would suggest instead is a top-down approach. And what a top-down approach could entail is instead of considering the entire composition, start with just a single, start with just the notes. The hardest part of this whole project is going to be the composition, because the notes themselves, the way that those notes play together, you don't want them to clash. And one of the biggest issues with this is things are might be out of key and out of time, and cause all sorts of dissonance when played together. So if you focus on just the composition, just the notes first, then you can figure out the orchestration of it, and move the different lines and the different melodies and the different parts of the chords to the correct notes to build out your overall musical approach. So I would suggest, with just starting out with the piano and writing your first, the overall chord progression that everything is going to follow. So this is a top-down approach, where we are thinking about the whole composition first, and then we will go into all the details of what instruments are going to play what parts. So this is how this composition starts. Let me make sure that this is all ready to go here. So here's the chords. This is how I started. And once you build the chord progression, right, so here's my 16 bars of the loop as it's going to be built. I know that each one of these cues is going to need a melody. So I have also written out 4 different melodies to represent the different parts. So here is the earth melody. Then I write out all of the different melodies against each other to make sure that they will fit. And when I go to actually, come back here. When I go to build out my earth part, I have all of the instrumentation that I want to use. Where'd it go? Here it goes. Alright, so here's the earth instrumentation. I have piccolo, flutes, nylon guitars, fiddles, and percussion. I think the piccolos took the lead line. So I can then start writing out the individual parts based off of the main initial chord progression and earth melody that was written. So here is the water melody. It's flutes. Let's see. Probably helps if I bring up the fader. So the flute took the main lead line, and then I have the harpsichord basically build out from the chord progression. Choirs, strings. So sustained violins and flutes take up most of the lead melody. Harpsichords and the choir take up most of the progression. Here's the wind lead line. Here's my wind instrumentation. So I think the oboe took most of the lead line here. Bassoon, harp, and then strings, tuba. This one's a little bit more subdued. Here's the fire lead line. Rest of the fire cue. And again, I just have string section, brass section, large, powerful instrumentation, percussion, snares, timpanis. So building out so the point here is start with the piano, figure out your chord progression, determine your melodies, and then use those melodies and the voicings of your chords to build out the overall progression. It's more of a overall top-down approach versus trying to hope that each new layer that you build in one at a time makes sense. There's still tweaking, and the melodies from the piano part didn't exactly fit the instrumentation because a piano part and a flute part is played differently, and so there's some massaging and tweaking to make sure it actually fits, but it's the overall idea when building out these layers. So each cue needs to have at least 4 or 5 instrument layers or more to create the enough layers so that it works by itself and still makes sense when it's all played together. All right, if you have any questions on that, let me know. But I think we will kind of move on from the palace composition. Next, for the, for your technical assignment, you will be creating the sound effects for Angry Bots, which is always entertaining because it's explosions and robots and lots of mechanical sounds and just some interesting overall sound design to work with. So the way to approach the sound design of this game, well, it can be similar to how you started out for 2D platformer. And that would be finding groups of sounds that you can build together and going out and searching for similar types of sounds, gathering lots of source material together and importing it and editing and building the files in your DAW session. So let me jump down here to the asset list. And again, the best thing that you can do is use the original sounds as a reference and as a guide to building your own sounds. So here is Angry Bots. Let's see, first off, did I close Palace or Renthalion? Okay. Here is Angry Bots right here. Well, it was right there. Right there. And in order to get access to the original sounds, all you have to do is right-click and do Show Package Contents. In there, it will have a folder that says Contents. And inside of Contents, you will find Data. And in Data, you will find Streaming Assets. And that is where you will find all of the sound effects for Angry Bots. There are 22 sound effects. And again, lots of them are similar, meaning that there's a lot of explosions, so you can just go off and spend some time finding explosion sounds and organizing them and editing them and layering them together to get your final version. Lots of debris sounds and impact sounds. So let's take a listen to some of these sounds here. And again, I think I'm going to have to turn down the overall volume so we don't blast ourselves with... Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it... No, I'll do it over here. Turn that down just a bit. And... let's see. First off, there's quite a few doors. So there's airlock door close, airlock door open. interior door close, interior door open, locked door open. And sometimes you can get away where the open and close are just the reverse of each other, or they're a good place to start, and then you can add some extra like things to the close can be the open in reverse with an actual impact when it actually hits and closes at the end. So there is close, airlock door close, airlock door open. All of these sounds are one shot except for these ambient sounds. The ambient sounds are they're longer loops overall, and they're just rain, kind of very much background sounds, and hum. When you walk into the robot factory, there's quite a few sounds for each of the robots: flying buzzer, patrol mech, and spider. Some of these, each one of these are explosions when you destroy them. So here's flying buzzer destroyed explosion. Patrol mech destroyed explosion. Which are extremely loud and very long sound because it's a really big robot there. Spider destroyed explosion. Self-destruct, when the spider gets close enough to you and explodes on its own. It's kind of like a bomb that blows up. I think that's a less than stellar sound there. What else? Each one of them has their own alert sound when they notice you. Patrol mech alert sound. The spider alert sound. What else? The flying buzzer has zap electric with a little lightning bolt that shoots out and zaps you. The patrol mech has 2 footsteps, left and right. Missile explosion, when the robot shoots and the missiles either hit you or explode around you. Well, this is the one it actually shoots before it explodes. What else? Proximity. This is as the spider robot gets closer and closer to you, it has a beep, a really quick beep, and that gets faster and faster as it gets closer. So you definitely have to do that sound just as short as that one. And then you have player hit when it gets shot with something. Player shooting. This is the muzzle flash on the machine gun that the character has. And terminal hacked. When the player stands next to a terminal, you can hack the terminal, and it can be some abstract sound like that. Or you can, I've heard some people do some interesting things where they just say terminal hacked, and it's in some sort of computery robot voice. Here in the chat, Jermaine, the sound with rises or swoops, how to create it or download. Are you talking about the doors as they swoop open and close? Airlock door. That can either be filter with white noise that opens and closes, auto filter, or it can be a Doppler effect. Sometimes it is just sound effects pulled from the library. You can type in the term whoosh, 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 and you'll find some sounds like that. And there are a couple of different techniques online that you can find to create those. But that's generally, the sound that you're describing there. All right, so you'll take all those sounds, you'll load them into a Logic session, and use that as a reference and as a guide for all of your sound design. Import all these tracks, or just take them, drag them onto a track. And again, just look at the overall volume of them, look at the length of the files, look how they start, how they end, the volume, and just use these as a guide as you're building your own. But other than that, it's very similar in how you just did your 2D platformer sound design assignment. Definitely, once you get done with this, you'll have all of the music and sound effects for your first 2 game projects. So put all of those files into the game itself and test them out. You can always take your files. Oops, where'd they go? And just replace these music and sound effects folders. Put all of your music and sound effects in there. The next time you play the game, everything is going to work. And your third assignment, your production technique, will have you building an orchestral template that will help out with the production for your game composition this week. I would highly suggest that you work on this production technique first, and then use this template to create your game composition and finish that one out. The reason for this assignment is when we first started the orchestral composition in this game composition assignment, I found that the quality of people's productions, their compositions, were suffering because mainly they were not using the best sounds that were available to them, and they were not using proper articulations so that they could access the quality or more realistic sound. So a template like this is going to give you very quick and easy access to all of the instruments of the orchestra so that you can very quickly start into your game composition and create a better quality production overall. So let me get my version of this happening here. Where did it go? Week 3. There it is. All right. So, with this assignment, one thing that I want to point out is that you get a PDF, a workflow PDF, that goes through all of the steps that I'm going to define step by step, and just kind of pictures and indication of what you will need to create and what you will need to edit in this session. So, actually, I need that back. This session contains 56 tracks. Those 56 tracks are made up of 14 instruments, and each one of those instruments has four different articulations. That's how we get the total of the 56 tracks. So you have your wind instruments first, your piccolos, flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoon, contrabassoon. Your brass, and after that, French horns, trumpets, trombones, and tubas. Then your string section, your violins, violas, cellos, and double bass. So each one of those has 4 different articulations, and you will create and build this session from scratch and format it in such a way that it'll give you very easy access to everything you want to build. So I'm going to recreate these piccolo tracks just to show you kind of the initial approach here. So in order to create a piccolo instrument, we're going to create some new tracks here. These are going to be software instrument tracks, and we're going to do one track with 4 multi-timbral parts. And what this is going to give us is 4 tracks that are routed to the same instrument, as opposed to 4 tracks with 4 different instruments. We want MIDI channels 1, 2, 3, and 4 to go into the same instance of contact. So we are going to use a multi-timbral instrument, one track with 4 multi-timbral parts. When you do this, you notice that everything is set to instrument 1 here. So you know that they're all going to the same instrument. Even says instrument 1, MIDI channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4. And if you look at each one of these, they all go to the same instrument, instrument 1, but they're on separate MIDI channels. So they're going to go to one instance of contact with 4 MIDI channels going in. Let me show you how that's different than just creating 4 tracks. If I were just to come in here like normal and do 4 tracks, 4 software instrument tracks, they're each routed to a different instrument. Instrument 1, 15, 16, 17, a different place overall. So that is not what we want to do. Let's go back. One track with 4 multi-timbral parts. And then you name them. This is piccolo. Copy that. How did they name them? Oh, come on. Piccolo sustain. Then it's piccolo full. Try that again. Forte piano. Then it is piccolo sforzando. Then it is piccolo staccato. All right. So hopefully you should be very familiar already with the difference between sustain and staccato. Sustain is going to be your longer held notes. Staccato are typically going to have a sharper or faster attack with not held down for very long at all, with a short duration. So once we have these 4 tracks set up, again, if you they're all on the same instrument. So if I go to instance of contact here, then all 4 of these are going to go to the same instance of contact, but on different channels. If I can fit everything in the screen. Let's do that. All right. So I have piccolo sustain. All of them are going to instrument 1. And so what I'm going to do is create 4 different instruments. I'm going to go into my browser here. Why is this so freakishly large? Oh well. I'll go into instruments and I will go into the orchestral library. Then I will go into the winds here and I will find piccolo and I'll load up 4 instances of piccolo. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and this is going to be piccolo sustain. This will be piccolo forte piano, piccolo sforzando, if I can spell it, and piccolo staccato. So once I have those set up, I can go into each one of them, and I need to make sure that the correct MIDI channel is set and that it's set to the correct articulation. And that's set to sustain. Then I can go to forte piano. This one is set. Each one of the MIDI channels should automatically be set because it's smart enough to go through and increment them one at a time. And I'll set this piccolo to forte piano. And I'll set this one to sforzando. And this last one to staccato. Once I have that set up, then I can quickly and easily access any one of the articulations just by record arming it. And let's see here. Bring up the keyboard. If I click on piccolo sustain, I get my sustain immediately. If I go over to staccato, I get my staccato sound. The other advantage here is I can actually layer. So I can get the attack of a staccato with the sustain. There's sforzando. Sforzando has a shorter attack. No, not shorter, like a longer, slower attack, and it fades out over more quickly over time. Certainly doesn't sustain as long as sustain piano, as sustain. Forte piano starts out stronger and then fades off to more of a lower level. So you can set all of these up, make sure they're all routed properly, and then use this template to build out your own game composition. The mixer window, you'll have all of your channels here, piccolo. And then each one of these is going to have an instance of the channel EQ and the compressor, but they're always going to be off or bypassed initially. Then you can turn them on one at a time as you need them. Instances of contact, those are going to be turned off. And they're also going to be blanked out. Once you have everything set up properly, then you should save it as a preset, or you will save it as a preset to deliver with the final session. You do save multi-as, and you will save it back into your DAW session, back into your Logic session, or with your Logic session. But they're going to be named orchestral piccolo. All right. So you only do patch only. You don't need to include the samples. We all have the same samples. And once you save it, then you can go to the file menu inside of Contact and do Reset Multi, which will reset or clear out that particular instance of Contact. And you're going to deliver the session with all of them blank so that it is very light and easy to load up the session. And then if ever you need that particular preset again, then you go back into the list. You can often do a recent list and just find it, and it will load it all up for you. So the session, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of naming and a lot of routing. Oh, I guess I should finish down here. Turn off all of your contacts, channel EQs, and compressors. Notice that all of your outputs, all of the wins goes to bus 1. Right? So here's all of my wins. Those are all routed to bus 1. They're all routed on the outputs also, so that they are outputting in line effectively, and are not doubling up the signal. You have all of your brass, they're going to bus 2, and all of your strings are going to bus 3. Then the winds has an aux master. The winds group has an aux master where bus 1 comes in here and you can affect the overall group of instruments, or bus 2 feeds into a brass master, aux master, and then bus 3 feeds into a strings bus master. There's a next bus is bus 4 that goes into the reverb, goes into an instance of Space Designer. So I'll just set bus 4 to be reverb, and those are from the sends. So it actually makes a copy out of the sends as opposed to replacing it on the buses. All right, so that should give you an indication of how to work on this session. Use the workflow PDF for the overview and the flow from one step to the next to make sure it's properly completed. But let's move on. And again, try doing the production technique first, getting the session template working, and then using it for your game composition will make your life quite a bit easier overall. Any questions at this point? Right now we're going to switch over to the peer review for your for Angry Bots. We've got a couple of submissions for those. Let me go ahead and close out a few things. As it reloads up all of my instruments here. Close this. Don't need this. We need this. Just save this for it. All right. So let's talk Angry Bots here. We got 5 submissions to check out. We'll do all of the stingers here. Take these. These look like stingers. Take all those over here somewhere. Make sure that they line up somehow. Okay, whoops. Now let's try some action cues. Action. Oops. All right. That should generally organize it. We've got our ambient cues. We've got the action cues, and we've got the stingers. Okay. So overall, let's talk about Angry Bots and the overall musical approach, and just kind of see what we have here in the submissions. We got a question here in the chat. Jason, what is the best way to switch from, for example, sustain to staccato when composing and programming orchestral parts that require a switch in articulation? Would it be to write the part in one articulation and drop it down to the others after writing, or is there another or easier way? There are 2 ways. One is key switching, which is going into a particular octave or part of the keyboard and hitting the keys to switch between the different articulations, and it could be possible to do that in real time, but I'm not very good at key switching live, and I typically have to go back and just write it one time through and then key switch it anyway, and like write my key switches separately. Or the other way is the way where you describe it, where you write it in one articulation and then copy the changes into the other correct articulations. And that also takes some time to go back and just cut it and edit it and move it in the right way. So both of them have the limitation where it is less easy to do it live. I guess you could have a MIDI controller that has a series of buttons on them and assign those MIDI buttons to be MIDI notes and have that do all of your key switching for you. So you could do it through a controller, and that might make it a little bit easier. But even then, I'm playing with both of the hands, and then I'm trying to switch buttons in real time, and I typically have to go back and just affect it anyway. The advantage of having them separate out to other tracks, having it separated out to other tracks gives the advantage that you don't have to do what's called chasing key switches, which means when you do key switching, there's a MIDI note that has to be triggered to switch to the right sound. And if you switch off to another sound later, you have to rewind back all the way to hit that first key switch so that it plays the right one at the right time. So when you have them separated out to multiple tracks, you don't have to rewind back like to the beginning of the song every single time to hear the correct articulation when it plays. So there's different ways of approaching it overall. So with key switching, you split the keyboard into different articulations. No, it's not different articulations. It's not splitting the keyboard. That's another way of doing it. You could introduce a keyboard split and have one octave be one articulation and another octave be another articulation. But with key switching, what I'm referring to, I don't even know if I can show it on this screen because it's too small. Let's see here. Key switching is let's see here. Will it fit? No, it won't fit. I hate that you cannot resize Logic or resize Contact. Uh-oh, where'd it go? Did that make it worse? That made it worse. Down there, where the keyboard is. Fine, I'll do it this way. I'll take a picture. Down here, where the keyboard is, in Contact, these are the notes. This is the range of the instrument that it can actually play on. Key switching is using these red notes down at the bottom to switch between all of the different articulations of the instrument. Notice when you look at these instruments here, next to the different articulations, I'll just make my own Contact here. There's the different articulations, and they have different notes: C0, C sharp 0, D0. So C0, C sharp 0, D0 will switch between the proper articulation. So it is very handy to use it in that way, and where you could actually play it live if you have the chops to do that, or else you'll go through and actually add it in the piano roll later some other time. All right. So the ambient cues are going to be, they need to be around a minute long. They need to loop. They need to be interesting and change over time. They need to develop over time. They can't just be one sound or one kind of drone all the way through or one idea. And they should have interesting textures that kind of filter their way in and out of the mix. So this one's concerning because it stops and ends. These three look good. This one is just going to be too low in volume. The bounce is just at a low volume. Again, these three are not going to loop, so all of the action cues need to loop. These have gaps at the end. These are too low in volume again. These, at least visually, look correct. And then 3 stingers. Oh, I guess I didn't say much about the action cues. The main thing that we're listening for is the difference between action and ambient. However loud ambient is, however much instrumentation, bass, percussion, however much energy is in the ambient cue, the action cue just needs to be bigger and louder and stronger than that. So where we are really looking for an intensity difference between the ambient and action cues. The stingers are meant to add embellishment and kind of hide a transition between the ambient and action cues. And so to add a little bit of randomization every single time one of the action cues are played, one of these 3 stingers are going to also play. So these have the tail's just a little bit too long, but they do go to silence. These look good. These look like they maybe just barely get to silence. These look like they're pretty good. These, again, look too low in volume. So that's just overall visual kind of stuff. Let's take a listen. I guess the other aspect of this would be the general aesthetic of it, so that it makes sense in the context of the video game. It's probably a more modern musical style, more modern production approach, electronic instrumentation, synths, samplers, drum machines, kind of a darker, grittier, stronger edge overall. All right, let's see what we have here. Let me just double check things, turn this back up, and turn this down. All right, we'll start with the first ambient loop. Got pads, kicks, snares, bass line. Sounds a bit too much like a pop song. Needs to be a bit more of kind of a textural kind of feel. The strong kind of in the pocket 2 and 4 kind of rhythm kind of feels more of a laid back approach. And it needs to have more change to the instrumentation than keeping it with a more of a traditional drums, bass, harmony, melody. So you can have some of these elements work, but then it also starts repeating the progression and the patterns as it goes through. The overall mix is really quite loud. So you're going to want to back off the main output or any compression or limiting that you're hitting there. And then, of course, it just stops. So you need to make sure that the file goes all the way through and it can seamlessly loop. Let's see how that works against the buzzer cue. All right, so there's a bit of a change here. That's good. Still kind of following a similar progression as the ambient cue. The drums have come up in the pacing. Oh, and there seems like there's a lead, but it's very heavily panned over to the right side. You want to watch out for hard panning. Watch the loop also. Let's see how it moves into the mech cue. Alright, I'm not feeling a strong enough difference between one cue to the next, or even ambient to the action cues. Similar progressions. The rhythm does change, and some of the instrumentation does change, but that string chord progression makes them feel quite similar as they move through the different cues. And that Alright, here's that lead line that's moved towards the center. But now there's some other stuff that's kind of panned off pretty hard. Alright, and even then, it kind of feels a little bit too relaxed and chilled. Like it needs to be, the percussion needs to be more up front and kind of pushing the pace forward instead of sitting back on that 2 and 4 on the snare and more in the pocket and groovy. Let's listen to 3 stingers. All right, you're definitely going to want to avoid short musical phrases, anything with strongly rhythmic or tonal. It just needs to be a strong hit. Like whatever probably would be a kick and snare and crash cymbal and some effects and lots of reverb and probably whatever these would be in reverse. So try working on the impact of the stingers, shorten them up, make sure they hit really quickly and then get out of the way so that it doesn't clash with the action cues. All right, let's try the next one. Here's the ambient cue. The synth and the arpeggiators give it a solid, like, spacey kind of feel. Alright, need a bit of a change here, maybe by this point. Okay, just a couple of things that felt like they were coming in. But really that part has kind of been sitting there the entire time, so we can get some change away from that small part. It really feels like you established the bass idea in the beginning and are adding layer and layer, but that keeps the previous ones playing and it keeps repeating all the way through, and you have to make sure that those go away. It sounds like they are. Those elements go away before the loop comes back around, or else there'll be a strong stop to everything. I think this should probably loop nicely. Alright. Yes, definitely loops nicely. But try not just building off the same one idea or the first place you start, because that, especially that kind of bell synth line, it's a bit repetitive as it goes through. Here's the whatever buzzer action. Cool. A little bit more change. Feels like the first quite similar. All right, so a decent pace, maybe a snare drum could kind of help the overall pacing. Here's the mech. Alright, needs percussion, needs stronger drums, drum pattern. And again, it gets a bit repetitive, needs more instrumentation and more development through the cue. So this one has a bit more or different instrumentation. That works. Although first half and second half could use a bit more change through them. Although I do like that last bar there. That definitely provides some variation overall. Let's hear 3 stingers. Okay. Alright, they sound really quite similar to each other. Could, again, use some more difference from one to the next. Watch out for these being pitched pretty heavily. They're being an octave apart from each other. So a bit more variation in the kind of impact and texture from those particular stinger files. All right. Try the next one here. All right, here we go with ambient. Overall feel of it works pretty well. There's some quantization issues. Some of the drums and where the electric guitar hits kind of feels out of tempo. So tightening it up with a bit of quantization would help. Need some more instrumentation. Now we basically have the pad, the bass, the drums, and the MIDI guitar acting all the way through. So kind of maybe moving away from the focus of the guitar part, adding in other synth layers that come in and out of the mix would add a bit more change. Watch the loop there, was quite a bit of stuff that just kind of gets cut off. And then you can hear it restart all of the attacks of the instrumentation when it loops around. So more change through the cue. The pattern feels a bit similar, or at least the guitar line. And yeah, adding more synthesizers with different tones that kind of move their way in and out of the mix probably be a good way to, good direction to head. Let's try some action cues. The instrumentation feels pretty buried in reverb, like it's missing the attack. There's some percussion in there that feels more of the kind of the distorted zip kind of sound. I don't know how to describe that. There's a crackle to something there that's getting in the way. There's some dissonance between the instrument layers. It might be the tone of the synth, but between the loose quantization and the lack of attack from feels like things are falling into the reverb hole. Just needs some clarity, and it needs stronger percussion. Just the single drum really doesn't help the pacing of the overall cue, and probably a kick snare pattern would help that. Here's mech action. Again, watch for hard panned instrumentation. The rhythm part here is better defined than the buzzer action cue. But it still feels like it's mainly dominated with the lead synth and the drum loop. And we'll try the spider action cue. Again, feels very loose. Try for a kind of a tighter pace, more similar to the action cue. There's a lot of there's some cool sounds that you have, and some of that would actually feel a little bit more appropriate to the ambient cue. Your ambient cue feels a bit more structured than some of the action cues, when it should be more the other way around, where the ambient cue has less form and structure to it, and then the action cues are really hard on the beat to really push the pacing overall. Here in the chat, when you say that you were trying for a shepherd's tone, were you trying to build one, or were you trying to use a synth shepherd tone pattern? Yeah, building one is quite difficult, and it works easier off of just straight sine waves and having them all layered together. But finding a shepherd tone pad or synth part is typically the better way of going with that, to have that kind of always falling or rising kind of feel to it. They're really an interesting, cool sound, but they're really kind of hard to manufacture. All right, and then three stingers here. Cool. Okay, so 3 is the best. 1 and 2, 1's too long. 2 is almost kind of too long, but it's got a cool different other sound in the second half. But both 1 and 2 need a stronger impact. 3 has it. It could even be stronger also. But Stinger has the best form in that. Stinger 3 has the best form in that. Where did I go here? That it hits hardest in the front and then has an interesting tone as it fades out. So there's Stinger 3. Make sure that it doesn't get cut off there at the end, that it goes all the way to silence, even if it needs to be a bit longer. And then Stinger 2. This part, the second part is more interesting than just the diminished chord in the first part, but again, a strong impact will help. This one almost feels like a little musical phrase with the alternating notes, so sharp impact and cool, interesting sounds, and then fade out to silence very quickly. Yeah. chord. All right. Move on here. Cool. I like the bass line from the arpeggiator. We got the synths. Now we need to maybe have a change. See where it goes. A bit sparse up to this point. Again, the best part is the bass line and the groove. Change. Those kind of changes could be introduced a little bit earlier. Maybe a little bit of change into the rhythm part by now also, so that we get variation through there. Watch out for the looping on that one. Yeah, I would say mainly bit sparse. Well, it's not so sparse anymore. It's not as sparse anymore, but it certainly could use some change because it's really sustaining on the same chord, and you got that drum pattern going around in the background. Watch for synths kind of starting over at the beginning of the cue, like that filter right here, closing, because every time it loops you'll hear that same filter right here. So those are small changes, a little bit more variation over the course of the cue, and introduce more instrumentation. Let's see here. Did this get cut off or something? Doesn't look like it. Okay. So, buzzer action is too short. Let's see what it does. Cool. I like the groove. Bass line and percussion works well. So just expand on that idea a bit more. And let's go to the mech action. Probably stronger drums overall. This one sounds a little too groovy. And maybe yeah, the loop feels off. Yeah, watch. I think this one is, unless you kind of maybe had a faster hi-hat pattern, this groove feels a little bit too separate from the other ones, the buzzer and the, well, let's hear the spider. This one works better, but it still feels too thin, needs more instrumentation. The groove works. Just flush out the cue a bit more with more instrument parts. Mech action feels the most off out of the three. Oops. 3 stingers. Nope. Stinger. Cool. Maybe a little too long. Maybe a stronger impact. Each one of those could have just a low bass or kick at the beginning. Cool. All right. definitely a good start for those stingers. And the last one here, I think the main thing to start out with is just going to be the overall levels to make sure that it can be heard properly against the rest of the music and sound effects in the game. It's got some interesting sounds in there, but it really sounds thin and distant. So I don't know if that's just the mix entirely. Also, it feels a bit out of time, out of sync. So maybe tighten up some of those arpeggiator parts. It's got a good kind of spacey feel to it, but there needs to be more definition of what it is. Here's the buzzer cue. Probably want to avoid the flute, so you want to use more powerful instrumentation. The drums also are kind of slow and lumbering. 2, 3, 4. Well, at that pace you would be at only 4 bars. So a little too kind of slow and lumbering, and you probably want to change the overall, speed up the overall pace of the cues. Some of the kicks and snares feel a little bit off at times. The snares are on the 2 and 4, that would mean that all of these cues are only 4 bars long. So I'm guessing that maybe either the session was at a different place, or counting the bars and beats, you're counting at a different rate. All right, all of the drums for each cue are a bit too similar overall. It needs more strength and pace to it, just more instrumentation and power. See if we can hear the stingers here. Those almost sound like an ending. All right, so again, tones, kind of the same tones that was used in the ambient cue. You want to make them a bit different sounding than the ambient cue and the action cue, so they stand out against the action cues while they're played. So a bit more development through the cues, certainly the volume overall, work on the sparse instrumentation, and just build out more layers. All right, so we have some good things to listen to, good things to check out, some notes to for changes through these sessions. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them up, but I think we're going to round it out there. And I'll stick around for a few moments to answer any sort of questions, but other than that, you have a good Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday, and I will see you again on Thursday. All right, thanks a lot.